Hello and welcome to Mrs. Reader's Readers. Welcome to Hanging Out with Mrs. Hammond. Uh, we're going to read a chapter today that is entitled Miss Honey's Cottage. Yesterday, let's think back what we read. We read the first miracle and then the second miracle. In the first miracle, we finally saw the newt, didn't we? That newt, Matilda had those magical powers that she does with her eyes, and she had that glass turn over. And what did the newt do? It fell out and it jumped onto Miss Trunchbull like this, and she was like, get that thing off of me. And she swished it off. And then it fell on the floor, and who recovered it? Lavender, didn't she? Well, in the next chapter, it was the second miracle. Now, Matilda had to tell someone about this power that she had. So she trusted not many people, but one person that she told. Who was it? Miss Honey. Miss Honey. And Miss Honey, first of all, she didn't quite believe her, but then Matilda actually performed the act of her turning the glass over. So Miss Honey has invited her to her cottage. So that's the chapter we're going to read today. I'm running a little later today, so we're going to move right along. I'm going to have some vocabulary, though, in this chapter. Promise. Promise is a small camp-type stove, and Mrs. Honey will read about in her little cottage. This is what she cooked on, was a primus. It's a little small camp stove. I don't think she had any electricity. I'm not sure. Phenomenon. Have you ever heard of this word, phenomenon? Very remarkable, extraordinary. If something is phenomenon, it's remarkable and it's extraordinary. Okay. Bold. Bold, B-O-W-L-E-D, is astonished, surprised, or overwhelmed. I mean, we can be bold. That means we're astonished. We're just overwhelmed. We're not sure. We're just like, can't believe this. Blithe. Blithe is carefree, manner, happy. Happy and carefree, blithe. Children are sometimes blithe. And then we have precocious. Look at this word, precocious. It's very clever, mature for your age, early mental development. Who in the world can we think of that might be very precocious? Matilda, right? Matilda's very clever. She's very mature for her age, and she has developed, her mental development is very early, isn't it? So she might be called precocious. I'm really excited to read this chapter. I can't wait. So let's get started. Miss Honey's cottage. Miss Honey joined Matilda outside the school gates, and the two of them walked in silence through the village high street. They passed the greengrocer with his windows full of apples and oranges, and the butcher with bloody lumps of meat and displayed naked chickens hanging up in the windows, and the small bank and the grocery store and the electrical shop, and they all came out on the other side of the village onto a narrow country road where there was no more people and very few motor vehicles. And now that they were alone, Matilda all of a sudden became wildly animated. It seemed as though that a valve had burst her inside of her, and a great gush of energy was being released. She trotted beside Mrs. Honey and with wild little hops, and her fingers flew, and she would just scatter them into the four winds, and her words went off like fireworks. And Miss Honey this. She said it was Miss Honey this and Miss Honey that and Miss Honey. I do honestly feel that I can move almost anything in this whole world, not just tipping over glasses and little things like that. I feel like that I could topple tables and chairs over, Miss Honey. Well, even then, when people are sitting in the chairs, I think that I could probably push them over. And the biggest things, too, much bigger things than chairs and tables, I only have to take a moment to get my eyes strong, and then I can push it out. The strongest at anything at all is so long as I am standing at it and looking at it and staring hard enough. I have to stare at it very hard, though, Miss Honey, very, very hard, and then I feel that I can feel it all happening behind my eyes, and my eyes got hot, just as though they were burning. But I don't mind that it's in the least. I don't mind this at all, Miss Honey. Calm down. Calm down, child. Calm down yourself now, Miss Honey said. Let us get ourselves not, let's don't get all worked up about this right yet. We're very early in the proceedings. But you do think it is interesting, don't you, Miss Honey? Oh, it is very interesting. All right, Miss Honey said, it's more than interesting. But we must tread very carefully from now on, Matilda. Well, why must we tread very carefully, Miss Honey? Because we are playing with the mysterious forces, my child, and we know nothing about them. I do not think that they're evil or anything. I mean, they may be really good. They may be even divine, but whether they are or not, let us handle them very carefully, okay? Well, these were her wise words from a wise old bird, but Matilda was too stinged up to see it that way at all. Well, I don't see why we have to be so careful, she said, still hopping about. Well, I am trying to explain that to you, Miss Honey said patiently, that we are dealing with this unknown, and it is an unexplainable thing. So the right word for it is a phenomenon. It is a phenomenon. Am I a phenomenon? Matilda asked. Well, it is quite possible that you are, Miss Honey said, but I'd rather you didn't think about yourself as anything in particular at the moment. What I thought that we would do is to explore this phenomenon a little farther, just the two of us together, that making sure that we take things very carefully all the time. You want me to do some more of it, don't you, Miss Honey? Well, that is what I am tempted to suggest, Miss Honey said cautiously. Goody, goody, Matilda said. I myself, though, Miss Honey said, I am probably far more bowled over by what you have done than you are. I am trying to find some reasonable explanation for this. Such as what? Matilda asked. Well, such as whether or not it's got something to do with the fact that you are quite exceptionally precocious. What exactly does that word mean? Matilda asked. A precocious child? Miss Honey said. Oh, it is one that shows amazing intelligence early on in life, and you are an unbelievably precocious child. Am I really? Matilda asked. Well, of course you are. You must be very aware of that. Look at your reading. Look at your mathematics. I suppose you're right, Matilda said. Well, Miss Honey marveled at the child's lack of conceit and self-consciousness. I can't help wondering, she said, whether this sudden ability that has come to you of being able to move an object without touching it, whether it might have something to do with your brain power. You mean there might not be room in my head for all those brains or something and that has to be pushed out? Well, that's not quite what I mean, Miss Honey said, smiling, but whatever happens, I say that it again, we must tread carefully from now on. I have not forgotten that strange and distant glimmer on your face after you tipped over that last glass. Well, do you think that it could actually hurt me? Is that what you're thinking, Miss Honey? Well, it made you feel pretty peculiar, didn't it? It made me feel lovely, Matilda said, and for a moment or two I was flying past the stars and the silver wings. I told you that. And shall I tell you something else, Miss Honey? It was easier the second time, much, much easier. I think it's like anything else. The more you practice it, the easier that it gets. Miss Honey was walking slowly so that the small child could keep up with her without trotting too fast, and it was very peaceful out there. And on this narrow road, now that the village was behind them, it was one of those golden autumn afternoons, and there was more like blackberries and splashes of old man's beards in the hedges, and the hawthorn berries were ripening scarlet for the birds. And then the cold winter came along, and there were tall trees here and there, and on either side, oaks and sycamores and ash, and occasionally a sweet chestnut. Oh, Miss Honey, wishing to change the subject for the moment, gave the names of all these to Matilda and taught her how to recognize them with the shapes of their leaves and the patterns of their bark on their trunks. Matilda took all this in and stored the knowledge away carefully in her mind. Then they came finally to a gap in the hedges on the left side of the road, and there were 5 barred gates. And this way, Miss Honey said, and she opened the gate and led Matilda through and closed it again. And they were now walking along a narrow lane, and that was no more than a rutted car track. There was high hedges of hazel on either side, and you could see clusters of ripe brown nuts in the green jackets. Oh, and the squirrels would be collecting all of them very soon, Miss Honey said, and storing them carefully for the bleak months ahead. You mean you live down here? Matilda asked. I do, Miss Honey replied, but she said no more. Matilda had never once stopped to think about where Miss Honey might be living, and she had always regarded her purely as by being a teacher and a person who turned up out of nowhere and taught at school and then went away again. Do any of us children, she wondered, ever stop to ask ourselves where our teachers go when school is over for the day? Do we wonder if they live alone or if there's a mother at their house or a sister or a husband? Do you live all by yourself, Miss Honey? She asked. Yes, Miss Honey said, very much so. Oh, they were walking over to the deep sun-baked mud tracks of the lane, and you had to watch where you put your feet if you didn't want to twist your ankle. There was a few small birds around in the hazel brush, but that was all. It's just a farm laborer's cottage, Miss Honey said. You mustn't expect too much of it. We're nearly there. Well, there came to a small green gate, half buried in the hedge on the right and almost hidden by the overhanging hazel branches, and Miss Honey paused with one hand on the gate and said, there it is. That's where I live. Matilda saw a narrow dirt path leading down to the tiny house. And here they are. And there's a picture of Miss Honey at the gate and Matilda looking. See how everything's grown everywhere? So she saw this dirt path leading to this red brick cottage. And here's a picture of the cottage. That's where Miss Honey lived. We might not have expected Miss Honey to live in a little cottage like that, but that's where she lived. The cottage was so small, and it looked more like a doll's house than a human dwelling. Well, I mean, the bricks it was built of were old and crumbly and very pale red, and it had a gray slate roof with one small chimney, and there were 2 little windows at the front, and each window was no larger than a sheet of tabloid newspaper, and there was clearly no upstairs to the place. And on either side of the path there was a wilderness of nettles and blackberry thorns and long brown grass. An enormous oak tree stood overshadowing the cottage, and its massive spreading branches seemed to be enfolding and embracing the tiny building and perhaps hiding it as well from the rest of the world. Miss Honey, with one hand on the gate, which she had not yet opened, turned to Matilda and said, a poet called Dylan Thomas once wrote some lines that I think of every time I walk down this path. Matilda waited, and Miss Honey, in the rather wonderful slow voice, began reciting the poem. Never and never, my girl, riding far and near in the land of the hearthstone tales and spelled asleep, fear or believe that the wolf in the sheep white hood, loping and bleeding roughly and blithy, shall leap, my dear, out of a lyre in the flocked leaves in the dew-dipped year, to eat your heart in the house in the rosy wood. There was a moment of silence, and Matilda, who had never before heard great romantic poetry spoken aloud, was profoundly moved. It's like music, she whispered. It is music, Miss Honey said, and then, as though embarrassed at having revealed such a secret part of herself, she quickly just rushed upon and opened gate and walked up to the path. Matilda hung back, and she was a bit frightened of the place now. It seemed so unreal and remote and fantastic and so totally away from the earth, and it was like an illustration in the grim of Hans Andersen. It was the house where the poor little woodcutter lived with Hansel and Gretel, and where Red Riding Hood's grandmother lived, and it was also the house of the 7 dwarfs and the 3 bears and all the rest of them. It was straight out of a fairy tale. "Come along, my dear," Miss Honey called back, and Matilda followed her up to the path. The front door was covered with flaky green paint, and there was no keyholes, and Miss Honey just simply lifted the hatch and pushed the door open, and the door went in. Although that she was not a tall woman, she had to stoop low to get through the doorway, and Matilda went after her and found herself in what seemed to be a dark, narrow tunnel. "You could come in for the kitchen and help me make the tea," Miss Honey said. And she, in the kitchen, and it's, if you call it a kitchen, she said, it's not much bigger than a good-sized clothes cupboard. And there was one small window in the back with a little sink under the window, but there was no taps over the sink. And again, against another wall, there was a shelf, presumably for preparing food. And there was a single cupboard above the shelf. And on the shelf itself, there stood a Promise stove, a saucepan, and a half bottle full of water. A Promise is a little camping stove that you fill with paraffin, and you might light it at the top, and then you pump it to get pressure for the flames to come up. "You can get some water while I light the Promise," Miss Honey said. "The well is out in the back." And she take the bucket here it is, and you'll find a rope in the well. And there's Miss Honey, and there's Matilda, and this. Get the book right here. This is the Primus stove. Now, she didn't have tap water. Like, she did not have a sink with running water like we do. So Matilda had to go outside into the well and draw water out of the well like they did in the olden days. So she was living like a pioneer person would live. So just hook the bucket onto the end, she said, of the rope and lower it down, but don't fall in it yourself. Matilda, more bemused than ever now, took the bucket and carried it out into the back garden. The well had a little wooden roof over it and a simple winding device, and there was the rope dangling down into a dark bottomless hole. Ooh. Well, Matilda pulled up the rope, and she hooked the handle of the bucket onto the end of it, and then she lowered it until she heard a splash, and the rope went slack. She pulled it up again, and lo and behold, there was a water in the bucket. And here she is, and this is the well, and that's a well, and that's where she tied it on, and she lowered it down into the water, and when she pulled it up, the bucket was full of water. And she has a handle over there that she's turning and cranking the rope as it winds around. "Never," Matilda said. "It's fun. How do you get enough water for your bath, though?" "I don't take a bath," Miss Honey said. "I wash standing up. I get a bucket full of water and I heat it up on this little stove. And then I strip and I wash myself all over." "Do you honestly do that?" Matilda said. "Well, of course I do," Miss Honey said. "Every poor person in England. We used to wash that way until not so very long ago. And they didn't have a Promise. They had to heat the water over the fire in the hearth." "Are you poor, Miss Honey?" "Yes," Miss Honey said, "very. It's a good little stove, isn't it?" The Promise was roaring away with a powerful blue flame, and already the water in the saucepan was beginning to bubble. And Miss Honey got a teapot from the cupboard and put some tea leaves into it. And she also found half of a small loaf of brown bread. She cut them into thin slices, and then with a plastic container, she took some margarine and spread it on the bread. Margarine is like butter, but it's not real butter. Margarine, Matilda thought. She really must be poor. Miss Honey found a tray, and on it she put 2 mugs and the teapot and the half bottle of milk and a plate with 2 slices of bread. "I'm afraid that I don't have any sugar," she said. "I never use it." "Oh, that's all right," Matilda said. In her wisdom, she seemed to be aware of the delicacy of the situation, and she was taking great care not to say anything to embarrass her companion. "Well, let's have it in the sitting room," Miss Honey said, picking up the tray and leading the way out of the kitchen and down the dark little tunnel into the room at the front. Matilda followed her, but just inside the doorway of the so-called sitting room, she stopped and she stared around in her absolute amazement. Well, the room was as small and square and bare as a prison cell. I mean, the pale daylight that entered from the single tiny window in the front wall, but there was no curtains. The only objects in the entire room were two upturned wooden boxes to serve as chairs and a third box between them for a table. This was all. I mean, there was no pictures on the walls, no carpet on the floor, only rough unpolished wooden planks, and there were gaps between the planks where dust and bits of grime could gather. Oh, the ceilings were so low that with a jump, Matilda could nearly touch it with her fingertips. The walls were whiter, but the whiteness didn't look like paint. Matilda rubbed her palms against it, and a white powder came off. And to her skin, it was a whitewash, the cheap stuff that is used in cow sheds and stables and in hen houses. Matilda was appalled. Oh, was this really where her neat and trimly dressed schoolteacher lived? Was this all that she had to come back to after a day's hard work? It was unbelievable. I mean, and what was the reason for it? There was something very strange going on around here, surely. Miss Honey put the tray on one of the upturned boxes and "Sit down, my dear, sit down," she said, and we'll have a nice hot cup of tea. Help yourself to the bread. Both slices are for you. I never eat anything when I get home. I have good old tuck in at the school lunch, and that keeps me going until the next morning. Matilda perched herself carefully on an upturned box, and more out of politeness than anything else, she took a piece of bread and margarine and started to eat it. At home, she would have been having butter, toast, and strawberry jam, and probably a piece of sponge cake to round it off. And yet this was somehow far more fun. This was a mystery in this house, a great mystery. There was no doubt about that, said Matilda, was longing to find out what it was. And here she is, sitting in the sitting room, and as you can see, it's just two boxes that they sit on and a box used for a table. And that's all she had. She had no furniture. She had no electricity. She had no running water. Poor Miss Honey. Miss Honey poured the tea and added a little milk to both cups, and she appeared to be not in the least ill at ease, sitting in an upturned box in a bare room and drinking tea out of a mug that she balanced on her knee. "You know," she said, "I've been thinking very hard about what you did with that glass, and it is great power that you have been given, my child. You know that?" "Yes, Miss Honey, I do," Matilda said, chewing her bread and margarine. "So far as I know," Miss Honey went on, "nobody else in the history of the world has been able to compel an object to move without touching it or blowing on it or using any outside help at all." Matilda nodded but said nothing. "The fascinating thing," Miss Honey said, "would be to find out the real limit of this power of yours. Oh, I know that you think that you can move just about anything that there is, but I have my doubts about that." "I'd love to try something really huge," Matilda said. "What about distance?" Miss Honey asked. "Would you always have to be close to the thing that you were pushing?" "I simply don't know," Miss Matilda said, "but it would be fun to find out." And that's the end of chapter 16. Well, they went into the cottage, and it was not what I expected. Was it what you expected? No, she lives very frugally, and that means she doesn't have very many nice things, does she? Very simple. So the next chapter that we're going to be reading is Miss Honey's story. Oh, I can't wait to hear about the story. Can you? I mean, why is this teacher, the teacher who lives like this? There has to be an explanation about this. So we're going to find out Miss Honey's story later. Everyone have a great evening. Thank you guys so much, and goodbye.